Well, thank you so much for taking the time to have a chat to us today.
No problem.
Now, first, just tell me a little bit about your podcast. It's called National Parks Podcast.
It's called America's National Parks, and we do every week. We release an episode, and it's mainly stories from history or recent events of things that have happened in parks, of some of the historic sites at parks. The National Park Service in the U.S. is more than just the 60 parks. There's 418 different sites that are all sorts of different historical sites, along with the big natural places. So we do this sort of storytelling style show once a week, and we've been doing it for about 9 months now, and it's become pretty popular.
So let's start with the basics for Australians. Like, how many national parks does the US have?
We've got the 60 national parks, and then there are a bunch of places called national monuments that are very similar, and some of them are even bigger and better than some of the national parks.
So what are some of those?
Like White Sands National Monument, which is just these beautiful dunes of white sands in New Mexico. Dinosaur National Monument, where you can go and see a lot of dinosaur bones preserved, but also big canyons. And the only difference is they haven't been given the congressional delegation as a national park. They're treated exactly the same by the National Park Service. They just don't have that name. They were appointed by a president. So there are really 418 sites that the National Park Service covers, but most of the national parks you've heard of, like Yellowstone, that type of park, there are 60 of them.
Right. So when we have the government shutdown, what does the federal government funding cover in those parks? And does it cover 418 sites or just the 60?
So in the past, before President Trump, in the past, all of the National Park Service sites were completely shut down, all 418 of them. And in the age of social media, there was a bit of drama over the Obama shutdown, and the Obama shutdown. There were lots of pictures posted of veterans not being able to go see memorials and things like that. So there was a lot of negative press that went along with it. So President Trump decided that the national parks would remain open during shutdowns. The attempt of this administration has been to make the shutdown not feel like a shutdown to most people. So the parks have been open during this last shutdown that just temporarily ended, and they were not staffed at all, except for mostly rangers that do law enforcement. So a park like Yosemite, which may have several hundred rangers, maybe only had 15 law enforcement rangers working.
Wow.
So it's a massive reduction. Nobody cleaning the bathrooms. As a matter of fact, bathrooms are locked in most cases. No visitor centers open, nothing like that. In some instances where it's not safe to open a park, like if there's a big heavy snow cover and the roads can't be plowed because there's no money to pay for the roads to be plowed, then those parks didn't open. Some places that have really important artifacts also did not open, like some of the historic sites that a lot of the historic sites are presidents' homes, homes from people like Thomas Edison. Those sites would not have been open during
Right.
the shutdown because obviously you can't let them inside. Carlsbad Caverns, any of the caves, none of the caves were open because they couldn't give cave tours without rangers. Anything that could be damaged really badly would not have been opened at all. But they did try to keep most sites open throughout the shutdown this time.
So then what happened to those parks without the funding, without the rangers, without the bathrooms being open, without rubbish being cleared?
Yeah.
What happened?
So for the most part, luckily this time of year, a lot of the country is under snow. There's a lot of cold weather, keeping people away from some parks. But in the warmer areas of the country, like Southern California, we did see certain amounts of damage. A lot of it was people just leaving their trash, trying to be responsible, leaving their trash next to a bin that was already full, and then it would just pile up from there. People using the ground as a restroom. But the worst damage we've seen is in places where people have gone off-roading in parks in their four-wheel drive vehicles, where normally they wouldn't have been allowed to. And we've seen trees cut down to make access for that at places like Joshua Tree. And we've seen graffiti at certain parks and tire tracks in places that have never had a vehicle drive across them before. That kind of thing, and we still don't know the full extent of the damage, but most of it has been just massive amounts of trash because in Southern California, this is the busy season. Places like Death Valley National Park, where it gets to be 120 degrees Fahrenheit, that you don't go there in the summer. You only go in the winter because it's nice and warm in the winter, but in the summer it's just too hot. So this is their busy time, and a lot of people have been going and using those facilities. Now, in some instances, the local states or the businesses that operate in and around the parks have spent some money to keep those parks operating on a little bit higher level.
And where did they get that money from? Was that from private donations?
Some of it, but some of it is just state government expenditures, local government tax dollars.
Yeah.
But some of it has been donations. Some of it has been just the businesses that work in, because a lot of our parks have private businesses in them, like lodges and tour operators. So a lot of those businesses have pitched in donations, or they've just come in and paid for a trash service to come empty the trash, that sort of stuff.
Yeah. So how long do you think it's going to take to repair the damage that has been done during the shutdown?
Well, some of it is not repairable. In some places where trees have been cut down, that's gone forever.
And those trees that we're talking about, like I've heard reports that some of those are the actual like Joshua trees that have been cut down for people to go off-roading.
Right. That Joshua Tree National Park has been hit the hardest because again, this is their popular season, and that's just not going to be something that gets repaired.
Yeah.
But there are the graffiti and the trash cleanup and all that. The Rangers have just gone back on duty in the last day or two, so they're still assessing all that stuff, and most of that should be cleaned up within a week or so. And there's a lot of volunteer efforts going on to help that happen. But the parks have also lost a lot of money during this shutdown. They've lost $14 million in entrance fees, and those entrance fees go to future projects. They go to making the parks better places, and that money has been not been collected over the time that the parks have been open without rangers.
So, Trump has reopened the government for 3 weeks. The rangers can go in and start assessing the damage at the moment, and they're negotiating at the moment with the Democrats.
Correct.
What does it kind of feel like you're in limbo? Like this could happen all over again?
It does. It does, especially since Trump has made it clear that he is not interested in a deal that doesn't involve a border wall, and the Democrats have made it clear that they're not interested in a deal that does involve a border wall. So all they've agreed on is that they will reopen the government for 3 weeks while they talk about this and try to make an immigration deal. But Trump lost a bit of, he lost in this battle. Essentially, the battle to keep the government closed, he was going to keep it closed until he won, and he caved in and reopened the government for 3 weeks, and that lost him a little bit of credibility. But he's such a wild card. You don't know what to expect from him, and he's not going to follow historical precedent. So we don't know really what will happen. And yeah, it feels like we're in limbo. We could be right back at this around February 15th, and there's just no telling unless some sort of deal comes up. Now, I imagine we won't know for sure, because this is just sort of how the budget deals work in the U.S. We won't know until the night before.
Wow.
If a deal is struck, it won't happen until moments before the government runs out of money, and because they use the crime as leverage. So it's really something that we can't be entirely clear on. I think that the part of the reasoning that the government opened back up was that it was starting to affect things like air traffic control. As a matter of fact, the morning they made the deal, a major airport in New York decided to halt all flights, and I think that sort of leverage is what ended it. Now, if it starts back up, we're going to have some time where everything's okay again for a bit, but we'll still be under a shutdown. So it absolutely could happen, and we just don't know.
So if they shut down again, will the parks remain open this time, or will they decide themselves to just shut because they don't want the damage?
The president is ultimately in charge of the National Park Service. So the National Park Service is a branch of the executive branch of the government, which is controlled by the president. So it's really ultimately up to him. And during this last shutdown, which was the longest in our history, there were multiple opportunities to close parks that were having problems, and it didn't happen. So my sense is that everything's going to go the same way, and that it won't be any different than it was through the last shutdown.
What would you say to Australian families who are planning a trip to the US? I mean, a lot of Australian families really look to go to these national parks. They form part of their itinerary, like particularly, going to see the Grand Canyon, the Joshua Tree. If they're going to California, they'll build in some of these to their trip. Should they go or should they delay?
I think until there's some clarity, I wouldn't plan on visiting a national park or that sort of, that would involve a flight from Australia. If you're here already, that's a different thing. Now, that said, there are a lot of places right outside the national park. You know, the parks don't end just because we put an imaginary line there and say that's the end of it. Most of our national parks are surrounded by other federal lands or by state parks that are every bit as beautiful. They just don't have the same names attached and are often the same sort of landscape. So I think depending on where you're going, there's going to be something different to do if you're looking for that sort of experience. I think the thing to avoid to not play most of the private lodgings, they're all going to be open. The thing to be careful about is planning camping in national parks. That's going to, if there's a shutdown, that's a harder thing to do. So that I would be careful about, and either delay or just make alternate plans. You know, if you're coming to Southern California, you have plan A is if we're not under a shutdown, you're going to visit Joshua Tree and you're going to visit Death Valley. If we are under a shutdown, maybe instead you're going to drive the Pacific Coast Highway and visit some of California's state parks, that kind of thing.
Yeah. So have a plan B.
Yeah.
Joshua, thank you so much for your time.